I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
When I was in my early to mid 20s, I lived in California. And one of my good friends was a Mexican American, and she didn't speak Spanish. And the reason she didn't speak Spanish was because her parents didn't teach her. And they didn't teach her because they said, "You are an American, you will speak English." So my friend grew up, she could understand Spanish because her grandmother didn't speak English and she could communicate with her somewhat, but she never learned the language. Now we're at an age where we have to rethink that native tongue. Now, I now live in Boston in a very, very, very Spanish speaking neighborhood. We have a lot of Spanish speakers, a lot of signs are in Spanish, and we have some people who also speak Portuguese, as well as other languages, including Chinese. And some of the children speak the language and some of them don't. So, my question now is, shouldn't you or should you teach your child your native tongue? And I'm one of those people who obviously grew up as an American speaking one language. And I believe that we as Americans have to get rid of this American exceptionalism nonsense and realize that even though a lot of the world speaks English, many people in other countries speak more than one language. And we should be on board with teaching our children, if we have a native language other than English, carrying on that tradition. It's good for the brain. What do you sisters think? Shouldn't we be teaching something else?
Well,
Well, I know that my grandson Royal, his other grandmother is Korean, and she only speaks to him in Korean. Now, she does speak English, but in order for him to learn Korean, she speaks Korean to him. That's how James, his father, learned Korean. And James's brother John also learned Korean from their own mother. And it has been really kind of a special gift that Royal has, is that he is going to be speaking English because that's his parents' native tongue. You know, they're English speakers, even though his dad speaks Korean fluently and an additional 4 other languages as well. But also in school, in kindergarten, Royal is learning Chinese. So he is going to be learning another language in terms of being able to communicate well with other students in his class that are also Chinese and European and Italian and Polish and Puerto Rican and Mexican. He's got all of these ethnicities in his classroom right now. So I'm sure there's a lot of that is going on in his situation.
Yes, there are a lot of schools, and matter of fact, most schools that are focusing on having children be bilingual, but you have a lot of Americans, whether it's fear or whatever it is, they want America to have an official language and make every immigrant have to learn that language. They're very lazy about wanting to translate things into other languages. And I realized how unfair that was when I went abroad. And, first when I went to Korea, and then even when I had a layover in China, and then when, Zakia and I, when we traveled to Japan, and I noticed even on the airlines, when they gave instructions, they gave them in several languages. And when I got to the airport, the instructions on where to get to the buses and all that was in several languages. And when I got back to America, I realized how deficient we are, because Chicago is an international city. And I looked around and said, no, if I was not an English speaking person, I wouldn't know how to go where I'm supposed to go. It's already confusing enough, but there is nothing. And then every now and then you might see something else in Spanish. But I mean, we have a large Polish population here. We have a lot of different language groups. And even though many countries teach English, a lot of older people might not know the language. I have a lot of friends, a lot of immigrants from Pakistan. Their parents never learned English, still don't know English. They've been here for years, but they just they didn't learn the language at home, and they don't go out and about among people enough to really need to know the language. But still, they have a right to do things like vote and so forth. So they just started translating the ballots and things into other languages. But and I look at it, the American attitude is so unfair for this to be, really, it is an international country, but the attitude of not wanting to know other people's language and not making it possible for people whose first language isn't English to be able to function, it's kind of an elitist thing. It's a discriminatory thing. And it really does keep you at a second class citizen level if you are trying to work in an area where they're just not sensitive to the fact that English isn't your first language. So I think for children who are learning other languages, there is definitely an advantage. I had a friend who was very angry because, when looking at a lot of the want ads, the job offerings and so forth, they were requiring the people be multilingual. And she was like, in a rage about that. She said, well, why are they cutting out the native born English speaking people? That's not fair. That's discriminating. And, she was going on and on about that. And I thought, well, let's see, there's nothing stopping us from learning other languages.
Right.
So
right.
Just do it.
And this is the thing, is that a lot of older people in other countries, like you said, they learn English, but they don't really learn it. Now, quite a few years ago, probably over 30 years ago, I went and I visited a friend in Japan. And before I went there, I learned some Japanese. Now, to say that I can still speak it would be ludicrous. I can tell you a few phrases here and there, more or less to tell you I don't understand Japanese. But at the time, I learned because I was going to stay with her family. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks. And they didn't really speak English. And I know that she did, but she was going to be working. I was going to be spending time with her parents and grandparents. I wanted to be able to communicate with them. But also, when I went out somewhere by myself, I think I went on a train, I was meeting her somewhere. And I find if you speak even a little bit of the language, and I was obviously a foreigner, so people were very drawn to me anyway. But if you speak even a little of the language, people are much nicer to you because they want to help you. And in this country, we are so racist and prejudiced and bigoted toward people who speak another language, who have an accent, that we think of it as a deficiency. And really, what I told one of my students last year, she was from China, and she spoke with a heavy accent, and she said something about worrying because her English wasn't that good. And I told her, listen, you speak another language. That's your superpower.
Yes.
And I told her that, and I never, and I knew that here she was, an international student. She was coming over here to study, and English wasn't spoken where she was from. I had no problem understanding her. And I realized, and that's what you have to come into the idea of with other people, is like, if they speak with an accent, that means they speak another language. Can you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. We're so used to being, and like I said, this whole American exceptionalism, that we don't believe that anybody should have to learn anything else. Even, like I said, I'm trying very hard, not as hard as I should be, but trying very hard to learn Spanish. just to be able to communicate with my neighbors. I have people who speak Spanish on one side and people who speak Chinese on the other side. I said, if God is out there granting wishes and wants to say, okay, what superpower do you want? I would love to be able to speak and communicate with every single language on earth, because the more languages you speak, the more people you can reach, that you can communicate with. And and a reminder, we do not have an official language. Now, I will say, if you're over here, you should probably learn to speak English, because if your house is on fire, you can't count on someone who speaks your language to tell them where your baby is in the house that you need to get out. But I would say that to also say, if you move to another country, you should also be speaking their language, because the same rules apply. And
Yeah.
I think that we
Don't
get
assume they
very
can speak
lazy. I
English.
know Zakia spoke Korean, speaks Korean, because she spent 6 years over there. And there are a lot of people who will move to a country and they will just
Yeah.
associate with expats who speak the same language as they do. And when you do that, you're isolating. And I think that that's what happens to people who come here who don't speak English. They isolate themselves in their own communities, and we need to all be able to build communities within our our neighborhood, and be able to, go outside our neighborhood and go to different festivals and go to different this and not be afraid. And we can do that if we learn the language. Now, I'm old, but I still believe I can learn some of the language. I don't think it's all lost just because you get to a certain age. I do think that the younger you start, the better.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Well, for the last 10 years, I have been
Well,
act-
that is one of the things that it says on go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
You were saying?
Well,
I was just going to say that one of the things that they have in an article in AARP was one way to keep your brain was to learn another language. And I read the same article in Reader's Digest when it was giving a list of things that would keep your mind alert and sharp. And one of the top things was to learn another language. And it's great for learning that kind of communication skill, to be able to speak to people who may be immigrants in the country. I remember us standing in line at an Aldi's once, and the lady was having a hard time trying to communicate what she wanted to say. And Lavinia, who happened to be with us in the store, spoke Mandarin. And when she intervened and spoke up for the lady was just so grateful,
oh yeah.
surprised but grateful, because Lavinia was able to say what the customer wanted and was trying to communicate. Those kind of things go a long way toward building good relationships with people.
Yes.
They really do. And it helps you to see people as people, because, we tend to ignore people if they're not speaking our language, and just dismiss them if we can't understand them. But when you can understand what each other is saying, and then, like you said, Barbara, something happens and people, they're struggling the best they can, but they can't be understood. If there's somebody who could step in, who understands and can translate, that just helps them get so much more respect. So it's all that kind of thing is so helpful. But for the last 12 years, actually, I have been studying 16 different languages and discovered really there's a part of your brain that opens up once you
Yes.
start learning languages.
Yes.
And because the second language that I learned was Spanish. But when I'm studying anything else like French or German or Swahili or Twi, it's like my Spanish kicks in. So it's
Yes,
interesting
it
how
will.
it is.
It will. That happened when I
Yeah.
started learning Japanese, and I would study, and I got to this point, and it's very weird how that happens. And I was studying, and I had a
Yeah.
private tutor when I first started, and if I would struggle with a word, the Spanish would kick in.
Yes.
Even though I hadn't thought about Spanish, now let me see, I was in my 30s and I hadn't had Spanish since high school. And so it wasn't until then that all of a sudden I said, well, where does that come from? And I mentioned it to my teacher, and he says, well, your brain keeps a spot for foreign languages.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, sometimes I can't, like I said, I no longer, because you lose language if you don't use it.
Right.
And I would love to study my
Right.
Japanese again, but right now I'm on my Babbel where I pay for it more than I use it. But when I do struggle with something now, sometimes Japanese will come in. And if I hear Japanese, even if I don't understand it, I recognize it as Japanese because it sounds different from Korean, it sounds different from Chinese or
Yeah.
Vietnamese or any of the other language from Asia. But I recognize it, even if I don't understand. I say, "Oh, okay, that's Japanese." Enough of it, I
Mm-hmm.
can hear.
Right.
But you know, but that's the thing is, and at some point, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to go to Spanish. I'm going to go back to my Japanese because all I've got is time now anyway.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we do. We want to keep using our brains, and
Brain.
it
Yeah.
would be nice, and it would be just very nice to be able to go to a country and you don't have to be fluent. You don't need,
But if you know enough to
if you know enough to say I need help.
yes.
You know
Or
enough
where's
to
the
say
bathroom?
where's the bathroom?
Yeah. Those are
You know,
critical
how
things.
much does this cost? Those kind of things that, and people will help you. I
And
find
thank you. That's
that
a key word to learn. Every day on our radio broadcast, the Female Solution, we start out with 16 greetings in different languages, and then we end the show with 16 different ways of saying thank you. And the whole thing is, if you listen to it every day, it'll just automatically get in your brain
yeah,
where you'll just know the words. And so what I want people to do is, if you can't do anything else in another language, at least be able to extend a polite greeting. And if you don't know anything else, at least know how to say thank you. And if
say please and thank you,
yeah,
and you're halfway there.
yeah, at least
Yes.
people will know that you respect them enough to know something in their language, that you see them. So I think that's a critical thing for us also, just the respect level. And so, and I know a lot of
You
people,
know,
they get
that was
ashamed
pretty
of that
interesting what
accent.
you said.
What's
Yeah, what
that?
was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't
Oh,
freeze
I
it.
was just saying when you talked about your Spanish clicking in after you hadn't used it forever, the same thing happened to me. I was trying to take a Spanish class while
Mm.
Eric was in seminary, and I was answering the teacher in French. And I thought, where did that come from?
Yeah,
I
where
haven't
did that
used
come?
French in like years.
Yeah.
And he would say something to me in Spanish. I would answer back in French and not know how that even happened. I was trying to learn
Yeah,
Spanish and here comes the French. So that does sound really strange that it does open up that area where you learned a language and then it comes back to you. And I found
yeah,
when I went on a trip with Lavinia to Paris, my French came back so quickly. I could understand it, of course, much better than I could speak it. But I was
yeah.
amazed that I could listen to conversations on the train and know what they were saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. They
So
were saying, listen to that woman with that terrible French accent.
listening. But a lot of times people do feel, if when English isn't their first language, they feel
Right,
very
right.
conscious about their accent because they know that it might be hard to understand. And sometimes people are reluctant to speak publicly if they know they have an accent because English was not their first language. So I try to be patient with people if I know that English is not their first language, because how would I feel if I'm trying to speak another language and it's not my first language and I know I'm
You have that
mispronouncing stuff?
terrible Spanish accent,
I
or
mean, one time I gave a speech in another language. I gave a speech in Urdu, which is spoken in Pakistan. And I had a friend, translate my speech that I was giving in English, but a lot of the audience members were Urdu speaking. So I said, okay, I'm going to speak to them in their language, right? So I'm, and I practiced it and so forth. But then, it was interesting the response I got, because some of the people, it's like for the first time they saw me. It's like we actually see you as a person. All the time, even when those Americans that have time they mix me up with my friend, who doesn't really look like me. We be both tall,
Yes.
women. But it's like we can see you now as a
Yes.
person because you spoke our language, even though there was a word or two I kept mispronouncing. But this the fact that I tried, it just showed a whole different respect level.
The
And people,
effort makes a big difference. The effort is
It really
everything,
does.
you know.
Yeah.
so when people make fun of somebody who's speaking with an accent, but at least they're trying. Yes, it's not their native language, but they're doing the best they can. And be patient if people mispronounce something or use the wrong word of it.
And,
Because
and if and if they do, you
Or
can
even the
correct them.
spelling. It's
You can correct them kindly because
yes,
they are learning.
right,
And
yeah,
that's the thing. You'll say, instead of distributors, you could say, okay, we say it distributors, or those kind of things,
right.
that because English is probably the hardest language to learn.
yeah, it
We
doesn't have
have
any
all
rules.
Because of the exceptions.
There's
Yeah,
all the exceptions. Well, I was just looking at something the other day. It's like, why doesn't daughter rhyme with laughter? Now think about how both of
I
those
know.
are
Our
spelled.
spell.
But it would be
That's
so
right.
hard to learn that if you
Right.
did not grow up and try to learn that, and especially the way they teach adults. The way they teach adults a language is to try to teach them to read it, write it, and speak it. And it's
That's
really
not how
hard to learn that way
it is.
because as a child, you learned to speak and then you went to school and learned how to spell it. And I think that I wish that there were a better way to learn it other than to, because you want conversational. But on the other hand, seeing it also helps you retain it. But like in Japanese, the sentence structure is different because the verb comes at the end. So you have to
Yeah.
wait for the whole thing and to get
Mhm.
to the
Right.
end, and whether or not there's an inflection and all other kind of things. And as adults, we start thinking, well, why is it like that? Why can't it be this way?
But that's the
And
way it is. Because it's
Because
not.
it's
that's the
not.
way it is,
Right. Right. Because it's not.
So even as we're trying, we're also rebelling and we're fighting
Right.
against.
Like it should be this way. They got it backwards.
Yes, it's like telling people in Europe that they're driving on the wrong
Yeah,
side
you
of the
drive on the
road.
wrong side of the road.
No,
No,
they're driving on the
here.
other side. There's
On
no
the
wrong
opposite
side.
side. Right.
Yes. So,
Yes, we should.
That's funny.
Yeah.
but now speaking of another way, I am actually creating a multilingual course. It's kind of a revolutionary way of learning language because of what I've discovered. Now, if you think about it, before you learn how to vocalize what you wanted, you somehow were able to communicate to your parents and they understood. And then, of course, you learn how to say the words and so forth. So there is a universal language that all people speak, all life.
Crying, isn't it?
Crying. Don't cry. Ah! Yeah, that too. But you don't realize it once you start vocalizing what you want. But everyone starts out communicating telepathically. And there's a feeling that comes with everything you say.
Well, there's
So,
energy.
yeah, it's energy. So you send the feeling before you say the word. And this is why you can understand what your dog wants, even though you're not speaking the same language.
I don't know. My dog always just wants a cookie.
She makes you go get it, though. She knows how to get you to go get it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, she does.
so I mean, we communicate between species that same way. We just don't think it consciously. But that's the same way human beings communicate when they don't speak the same language. So when you think about how you actually learn language, first you learn the feeling that comes with what you're saying, and then you learn the sound that comes with the feeling. So as a child, you just learn the sounds, which is why it's so easy to teach a child multiple languages, because all they
Yes.
got to know is just remember the different sounds that go with that feeling.
Yes.
So
In fact, Elsa, who we will have on a show, coming up, in the next few weeks, my friend Elsa, she speaks French, and then she started speaking Arabic because her husband speaks Arabic, and he would teach his daughters Arabic. He would speak to his daughters in Arabic. Well, she wanted to learn it, so she speaks French, she speaks Arabic, obviously she speaks English, and I call these people my superheroes because their kids are growing up multilingual. And that's the thing, and it's just like, okay, when she, because Sarah used to babysit for the girls, and when Elsa wanted to say something to them, privately, she would just speak to them in French, and they understood. And
yeah,
they grew up under, because she used to watch the girls from the time, now Yara was, and I shouldn't say their names, but Yara and Zoya, but when they
well,
were,
nobody knows where they live, so it's okay.
yeah, well, she would
You
speak
don't
to
know
them.
their address.
Well, the oldest girl, who's now 11, was 2 when she
Mhm.
first started watching them, and and so she learned, and they do learn eventually how to separate. Like, sometimes people say
Yeah,
that the kids will get the languages mixed up, and eventually they don't, because at the same
eventually
time
the language
she was
sounds goes
she
with
was
this.
having daycare at a place that spoke Spanish.
Yeah.
So you can, yeah, and I know there's obviously Lydia, who we had on last week, speaks 4 languages. There's other
Hmm.
people that I know. I had a personal trainer who was Russian, who spoke several languages. And so we we are the exceptions, in that we are too lazy or afraid, or
Yeah.
our educational system is lacking,
Arrogant sometimes. Just, well,
you
they
know.
should be speaking my language. I shouldn't have to learn that foreign stuff.
Yes, and
Well,
so
there is that
you
joke
froze, Barbara.
about what do you call a person who speaks 2 languages by bilingual. What do you call a person
Bilingual.
who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call a person who speaks only 1 language? American. So
American.
that's like the
Yeah.
joke
American.
that
Yes.
was always
Yeah.
passed on. And I will
Yeah.
say, back when we were living in Uptown, and we lived in a neighborhood that was uh, a lot of immigrants that were from Cambodia, our kids actually learned the Cambodian language just from playing with their
Yeah.
friends in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And these kids were like, oh, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and they're speaking
Mhm.
Cambodian just as fluently as if they were growing up in a Cambodian household. And it was just the kids playing together. So kids
Yes.
have that ability to pick
Yeah.
up foreign languages very
Very.
easily.
Yes.
And I will say, for listening to people with an accent, sometimes you just have to listen harder. My friend from Cuba,
Yes.
when she
Yes.
speaks, and because I've gotten used to hearing her, I can understand her. But I remember in the beginning, I had a hard time differentiating what she was actually saying. But as I got used to her accent, I was able to
Yeah.
understand her. And I just think we just have to have more grace when we are learning how to interact with other people whose English may not be that well spoken.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we have to stop listening with racist ears, because
Mm.
and think about it, because we get to the point, and there's sometimes, because I've called, we've all called customer service where, they weren't from here,
Yeah.
and you just have to say, okay, I didn't understand that, can you speak slower? You don't have to get nasty and say, oh, you know what, you got an accent, I can't understand you. Just
Yeah.
say, okay, can you
Need
repeat
to get some.
that,
They need to get
or
some
speak
English speaking
closer?
people
Yeah,
working here.
exactly, because you know stop, take off your racist ears, and listen, and give them yes, and give them the grace that somebody, when you travel, is going to give you.
Right. Because you're gonna sound foreign to them.
And let me tell you, not for nothing, but when I first moved to Boston, I couldn't understand what 3 of these people said.
And they were speaking English.
And they were speaking English. I don't even hear the accent. You all claim that my husband has an accent.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even hear it
Yeah.
anymore. But when I first moved here, it was like being dropped into a foreign country where you did not know the language. And I would go to ask people directions, and I would nod my head, and then I would go and look for a sign that sounded like something that they might have said. Believe it or not,
You know,
this
it's
is
like that
before
in Florida.
GPS, and I actually did not get lost as often as you think I would. But there's, and if when you talk to somebody from the deep South, and they have that drawl, so all of us have accents except for us three. You know,
We speak.
y'all.
We're Midwesterners. But I, get me angry enough, and I get that whole, Black woman Southern thing going too. So, so that's the thing, is that we need to give each other grace. And if somebody doesn't understand, understand that this is their second or maybe third or fourth language, and you have to listen and be more discerning about, your feelings toward people who have accents, and embrace. And if you are an immigrant, embrace that part of your culture. Speak it at home. They will learn English in school.
Yeah.
They will learn English in school. They will learn it from their teachers, from their friends. But keep your culture. Keep your culture.
Keep your culture. And I think that is really the rule people should choose. Keep your culture. They will learn English in school, but they need to keep connected to their roots.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've got to go. We want to remind you all to make sure you like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel, 3 Black Moms. Join us every week. We are live at 5 Central, 6 Eastern, and wherever you are in the world, you can tune in or watch us in the archives, YouTube and Facebook. And until next week, I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black Moms. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Bye. Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're 3 Black Moms.